welcome to Deep Weird. As always, I am Jacob Pittman, and we have a very interesting story for you tonight. First, though, I need to issue a little bit of a disclaimer. This will show up again towards the end of the episode because I take it very seriously. Today we're going to be talking about faith healing and other forms of alternative healing. I feel that in the paranormal community, anytime these topics are brought up, we have the responsibility to say the following. If you have any sort of medical problem, physical, mental, chronic, or otherwise, please make an appointment with the corresponding medical professional. Feel free to get as many healing crystals as you want. Feel free to go to as many Reiki healers as you want. Feel free to go to as many tent revival hands-on healers as you would like. But please do that either on your way to or on your way back from the doctor. Physical illnesses are real and they have physical causes and physical treatments. That being said, today we're going to be talking to another Jacob who has some very interesting experiences with alternative healing and as well as just some fun ghost stories for us. So without wasting any more time, let's hear from Jacob.
I like to think of myself as a really down-to-earth kind of person. My name's Jacob. The work that I do is typically I work from home. Right now I'm putting myself through training to learn data analytics and, get, jobs in whatever company I can doing that just because it pays well and I like statistics. Previously, I've worked for therapy companies helping people find talk therapists. I've also done metal and steel working jobs. I've worked at plumbing and HVAC supply stores. I've kind of been all over the place. I'm the kind of person that's really, really good at getting a job, but not great at keeping said job.
Right.
I got a bit of an issue with authority, and I'm not very good at playing the kiss ass game that you see in corporate environments and stuff. So
yeah, I think a lot of people from our generation can probably identify with that.
Yeah. So that's kind of my general background, what I do for work, what I do for a living. I'm writing fantasy books. I've written basically my own TTRPG from scratch. It's sitting at 400, 500 pages. Fully playable. I'm just polishing it up and getting it ready to maybe try and get it published. We'll see how that goes.
So you said that you're really interested in statistics specifically.
Yeah, I like statistics. My brain is really bad at math. I have dyscalculia, but statistics I like because I can wrap my head around the solid concept. It just, as a math, it feels like it has meat for me to sink my teeth into. Unlike trig or calc, which is just random Greek symbols on a board that mean nothing to me.
Right. Yeah, you need the math to be applied. You can't just do the math in a vacuum.
Exactly.
Right.
And statistics is very applicable to me and my brain.
So is it fit? Because you said that you were writing fantasy stuff, but one of the primary projects that you're working on is this tabletop setting. So I think, do you think it would be a fair characterization to say that between designing this tabletop setup that is a very sort of because if you look at the rules, even in D&D, there has to be a strict coherence to the rules and everything kind of has to be a little bit logical, and you tend to lean towards statistics. Do you think it's fair to say that you have sort of logic brain?
I very much have logic brain. Everything about tabletop RPGs, unless you get into the very rules light, theatrical, theater of the mind kind of stuff, everything about the biggest ones that you see, Pathfinder, D&D, my game, it's all based on statistics. It's all very, very hard math. It's all bounded number systems. And that's what you have to do to keep everything in check and to keep the monsters and the players on similar levels, so that everyone has fun. I definitely see myself as an incredibly logical kind of person. And it's just the way that my brain works. I'm not one for flights of fancy. I'm not one to get pulled into conspiracy theories. Um, I like to view everything as objectively as I can. So yes, that's true.
Right. So just to dovetail into the reason that you emailed me and that you're sitting here talking to me on this podcast right now, you have a history with paranormal investigation, and you've
Hmm.
had several sort of experiences doing that. So how does some, and I'm asking this sort of rhetorically because there will be people in the audience that are thinking this in their brain. How does somebody like you, who is this professed, like, very logical person, very sort of by the numbers, how do you get involved in a hobby like paranormal investigation that most people would consider is just sort of nonsense?
Because it's an unanswered question. I mean, before we discovered electricity, we didn't know what it was. Like the lightning in the sky was, Zeus being angry. We didn't understand that it was, massive quantities of electrons moving from, negative to positive, whatever, and we didn't have all that mapped out. So, my thought behind that is like maybe there's another kind of energy that we don't know about yet, that somehow we as people, as living people with potentially souls, are creating, and that leaves behind imprints from where we've been or where we've been close to having very emotional kind of experiences. It's a lot of things can be explained away, like, well, this happened and that happened and that's causing this. And you see ghost hunters like point out like, yeah, you see that unshielded transformer over there? Yeah, whenever you stand near that thing, it fucks with your brain and makes you paranoid, like you're being watched, like that sort of thing, just because the electromagnetic fields and stuff. And that's half of the answer too.
Why don't you walk me through what you think are some of your most sort of like wild experiences doing these investigations?
This was basically put around like one night, like a couple of like my wildest experiences. Because when I was younger, like in college, me and my buddies were all into like researching paranormal stuff and doing amateur paranormal investigations. And Halloween's always our favorite holiday. Um, but we were very serious about it, and we believed in it. We booked. We went through several tours of like semi-local haunted houses, experienced some weird things, but nothing wild or off the pocket. But around where I live, the town that I live in is very old. It's not very big, but it is very old, and there's history in the town of like some minor witch hunts. There's history in my town of like sanatoriums and tuberculosis, a small tuberculosis hospital, things of that nature that have that were here like in the very earliest like 1900s, a little earlier than that. And so the big night when all of like the weirdest stuff that happened to me actually happened like in my hometown. We decided that we were basically like, we were college kids. It was a Friday night, nothing going on Saturday. Instead of going out to a frat party or something like that, we were just going to go around to a lot of the weirdest places in town in the middle of the night and see what we could come up with. So we did a bunch of research beforehand, looked up like what all the weird things were. And I think it was our second stop of the night. First stop of the night didn't have much. Second stop of the night was a local graveyard. And so we were wandering around the local graveyard, and I was, in my spiritual phase, so I was open to all kinds of things. And I have something else to talk about too, but that's a side tangent. We'll get back to that in a minute. And we found like the grave of an old like white witch that had been buried in this graveyard. And essentially the idea was that this white, in every old graveyard, you want a white witch to be buried in that graveyard. Like, if she lived anywhere near that area, and when she dies, you want her put there because, you know, her spirit will act as a protector for that graveyard and ward off the evil voodoo or whatever.
That's interesting. I've never heard of that sort of like folklore tradition before.
Well, I live in Appalachia.
Oh,
So,
okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
yeah,
Appalachian folklore
Appalachia,
runs very deep.
it runs very, very deep. The mountains of Appalachia are literally older than bones. Like these mountains existed before animals had bones.
My yeah,
In evolution.
my favorite sort of like fact about how old the Appalachians are is that the Appalachians are older than the Atlantic Ocean. You can actually see where they pick up again on the British Isles. So yeah, they've been there longer than the entire Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, they were there whenever we were still Pangea.
Yeah.
Older than the rings of Saturn. These forests and these mountains are beyond ancient. And the people that live here, you know, obviously, you know, they haven't been here that long, but you go back in the mountains, you get to talk to some wild people, and there's a lot of wild beliefs. Like, I don't live like deep in the mountains, you know, I'm more of a foothill dweller, but I'm in an area where the horizon is never more than a mile off because there's always a hill in the fucking way. That's where I'm at. And some people say that I'm surrounded by mountains, and I just kind of wave at them like, those aren't mountains, those are hills. What are you talking about? Yeah, old Appalachian kind of mythos, like bury a white witch in a graveyard, and that witch will like keep the graveyard quiet, calm, and peaceful, and ward off any of the bad spirits. So we found her grave marker, you know, like cleaned it off to make sure that yes, this is really her. This is when she lived, and I forget when she lived. I think it was like, you know, I think she lived through the late 1800s and was buried there in the late 1900s. But you know, I got called, you know, or I felt a calling to sit down and just have a meditation. Like, I don't know if my intent was communion or what. It just like, it's this thing that popped into my head, like, I should do this. And so the other guys were like, hey, we're going to go check out this other gravestone, you know, a little bit over this way, like, you know, maybe a few hundred feet. And I'm like, that's fine. I'm going to hang out here for a second. And so I sat down and I dropped into like a meditative state, and I was overcome with just this overwhelming sense of peace and calm and clarity. And I kind of like in my mind, I kind of drifted off into this like I want to call it like a mental mist. It's really hard to describe and explain, but like I felt like, you know, I was just kind of floating there for a while, and in my mind, like I had that experience, and I just kind of like, you know, touched the tap for like 30 seconds, you know, a minute before I felt myself kind of take a bit of a deep breath and like open my eyes and wake up. And so, you know, I shook myself off like, man, I feel really good. Like I just had a power nap. Like, this feels great. And so I got up and I brushed my pants off and I looked around. My friends were fucking gone. Like they were nowhere to be found. Like it was foggy that night. So like however far away in the fog that they were, I couldn't see them. I couldn't hear them. They were just gone. And so I get up and I wander towards the direction that they said that they were going to be going. And a minute or two later, like, you know, I heard him talking and I walked over, and I'd probably gone like half a football field to find him. And when they saw me, they were kind of like, dude, where'd you go? And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, I was, you know, sitting on top of the grave like I told you I was. And they're like, no, we looked there. You were gone. And I'm like, no, well, wait, you looked for me. How long? I've only been there for like a minute. And they're like, brother, it's been 30 minutes. And I'm like, you're shitting me. Like you're bullshitting me. Like, no. And then I check my phone. No, it had been like 25 minutes. I had no idea of the time passing.
Do you have anything to make of that at all? Like, what do you think happened?
I don't know. I mean, it's a relatively flat graveyard. It was foggy. maybe they got turned around and looked in the wrong spot, and because they're dinguses and just like completely missed where the hell I was. um I know that whenever you go into like meditations like that, like if I was able to sink myself in deep enough into a meditation, like time kind of stops being a thing inside your mind.
Yeah.
It uh, that's that is the thing that I could say, like, this thing and this thing and this thing put together could give you a rational explanation for what happened.
Right,
Um,
but of course, just to play devil's advocate here, it's very easy to imagine that if they sort of misplaced you or couldn't figure out where you were at in the fog and thought that you were missing, you'd think that they would like be trying to find you, right?
yeah,
Like if like they wouldn't like walk to the wrong spot or like get lost or get turned around and just be like, well, there goes Jacob. Like,
yeah, he gone.
yeah, like that seems not like a thing that would happen.
You would imagine that they might call out, like,
Right.
yell for me. I didn't hear shit.
So you said that you went on this night to have a couple more experiences?
The next thing that we did, I think we left directly from there to the next one. I don't know if there's anything in between. I can't remember that far. But we basically timed the night out to where like it was like a slow buildup of things. And the peak of the night was beginning at 3 a.m., of course, witching hour. Um, and we arrived at a local sanatorium at 3 a.m. We had to climb a hill, through woods, like a decent ways. Like, I don't know how the hell people got up to here previously. Like, there must have been a road or something somewhere. We couldn't find it. And the buildings that we got to were like whatever you think ruins, like in a video game.
Right.
That's what this thing looked like. Like,
Yeah,
they were
it
brick
was
buildings,
looking like Firelink Shrine.
Firelink Shrine, just
Yeah.
like half of it was falling down. Like, none of the buildings had roofs anymore. The walls were all craggly. Like, it was jacked up. We were there, and like all of us were like, man, this is spooktacular. Like, I feel freaked out just even being here. There is something else here. Like, it felt like there was a freaking panther out in the darkness, just watching and waiting to pick one of us off. Like, we all agreed we had that hair prickly kind of spooky feeling, and we proceeded to speak to whatever was there. And by God, did we get like responses. So, like, we would all be standing there and we would ask whatever was there, like, a question, like, respond if, oh, I forget, if you were here during the time the sanatorium was active. And then, like, a rock would get thrown inside of one of the buildings. And I'm not talking like a pebble would, like, fall off a ledge and just drop onto some leaves. I'm talking someone picked up a fist-sized rock and hurled it at a brick wall.
Right.
And we were all standing right the hell there. There was nobody missing. So unless there was literally another person somewhere in that ruin, like a homeless person or something, just camping out there, that's not a thing that should have been happening.
And what do you think the over under is on a homeless person walking out there? Like, is this an accessible spot? It's like the type, because there's a lot of places that you go like this where you'll go out there and there will be like mattresses and stuff on the ground and it's obvious that people are camping out there.
No, there was none of that. Like, there were no mattresses, there were no beer bottles, there were no used needles, there was no none of those things that you see around here in homeless encampments. We
Right.
walked through every one of those buildings. We didn't see a single soul. We didn't hear any footprints anywhere. There was nobody else there. And I mean, like, this wasn't like terribly far from town. Like, if I wanted to walk like half an hour, like, I'd get to town.
Right.
But like, no, I'm there. There was exactly zero sign of any person camping out in that area. Nothing. Other things that happened that, homeless person or not, shouldn't happen. Things would balance that should not balance. So, like, I had heard that this phenomenon could possibly occur. So I picked up this real crooked, bendy, like, branch, and like I just kind of set it point side down on the ground, and so it had like this L-shaped kick off to the side, just big old heavy branch. I set it lightly down, point side down onto the ground, and I let go, and it didn't fall over. There's zero reason that should have happened. Like it was literally just, it wasn't quite hanging in space, but it should not have been standing the way that it was standing. There's the laws of gravity don't work like this. That was just kind of through the first half of the night, you know. I caught visions of like somebody, like I went inside some of the buildings, and while I was in there, like I caught visions of somebody that basically was sleeping in a bed, and like six people came, like snuck into their room, like threw a bunch of sheets over him, like it was like someone on either side of the bed threw a bunch of sheets over him to hold him down, while two other people just like beat the shit out of him with bags full of something. I don't know,
When
potatoes, rocks, no
when
idea.
when you say you had a vision, was this like another meditative experience, or did you just like walk in and sort of get hit by it?
I walked in and got hit by it. That was not
Okay.
meditative.
Okay.
Not meditative at all. But things started kind of winding down a little bit. It kind of felt like whoever was there was kind of getting sick of us, like being there and like disturbing them. So we did the thing that like every supernatural person, like supernatural explorer, paranormal investigator is told not to do, but all of us do it anyway, which is goad the spirit. You know, we goaded it. We were saying mean things to it because it had stopped doing weird things, and we wanted to see it do more weird things. But we just kind of got this, like, the way that I describe it is the feeling whenever you're like out in public as a child, and you know you're at a function that your parents took you to, and you misbehave, and you look over at your mom, and she gives you that look that says, "I'm gonna fuck you up whenever we get home." Like that's just that feeling in the pit of your stomach of, oh dear, I'm in trouble. And but the person that is like you're in trouble with isn't doing anything outwardly to let you know that you're in trouble. You just know. That's kind of the feeling that we got, like as it moved from like 3:30 to 3:40, 3:50. So, you know, 4 o'clock rolls around. We hadn't really seen much of anything in like 20 minutes. So, like 4 o'clock, 4:10, we're like, all right, well, that was really weird and really interesting. I'm super glad we came here, but it's past witching hour now, so it's time to go. So we all start, you know, walking down the hill, and it's two people. Four of us went. There was two people in front of me, and then there was me, and then there was my buddy Will. And all of a sudden, as we're walking down the hill away from the sanatorium, we all hear him just yell, like scream. And Will was in the army. He was a medic in the army. So, and he really, really likes to play up the tough guy kind of persona. Like that's his whole thing. Like he's a boxer, he's a medic in the Marine, he's a big tough guy. So, hearing him like shout and yell, kind of concerning because that just breaks his entire persona. So we turn and look, and he's got like his hands like reaching to like try and like reach his back, as you know, like his face is all twisted up like he's in pain. And so we're like, bro, like what the hell happened? Did a branch like whip up and hit you as you passed it? And he's like, no, something came up and got me. And we're like, what the hell are you talking about? So he's like, I don't know, my fucking back. And then he turns and like he's like, what's on my back? And so he pulls up his shirt from his right shoulder all the way down across his back down to his left hip were just four bloody rake marks. Like someone came up with their hand as hard as they possibly could and just raked him as hard as possible. Like he was bleeding. It was even just in the light of the moon, like it was visible, like very clearly visible. And it's completely physically impossible for him to have done that to himself. Like you cannot bend your arm to do that. You can't do it. So yeah, that was the last stop in our trip, and that's the last event that happened, and that was the end of our paranormal night.
Now that we've got sort of your ghost stories out of the way, why don't we get into the religious background a little bit so that we can get into what I imagine is going to be like the real bombshell of this interview?
I was raised in a very conservative Christian household. Like I started going hunting, when I was still single digit ages. Spent half my life in the woods. I remember my dad waking me up at like 4 a.m. to go turkey and deer hunting. Spent my whole life in church. I actually chose like I got like a 29 on my ACT, and which is kind of like a different version of an SAT, and the maximum that you can get is like 36, but almost no one gets like a 30 plus. I got a 29. I wanted to take it again so I could get the 30. My dad was like, "No, that's $200. I don't want to pay that. 29 is good enough." And so I applied to several schools, and one school that I applied to go to college offered me a free ride because I got that 29, and I turned that down to go to a specifically Christian university, which did not offer me a free ride because I felt like, oh, God has my wife waiting for me there.
Right.
That is how deep into that I was. But while I was there, I had a roommate, and throughout all this, like I kind of saw things like like most Christians do as being a very physical thing. Like, yeah, you're fighting spiritually, but like you can do things physically to interact with that spirituality. And like even after this for many years, it was through like 2016 that I still maintained a pretty strong faith. But from 2016 onward, it's just kind of been like declining real bad. And at this point, I basically consider myself an agnostic. But while I was in my first college, my Christian college, I had a roommate and everyone called him Grandpa. Because the rest of us were like, 18 and living in the dorms. And he was 26. So he came back to pursue more education and just, decided that dorm living would be better than paying rent in an apartment somewhere. Grandpa had a pretty storied history, alcoholism and drugs that he had gotten over. But one of his major stories was that one night he got, super blasted with a friend of his and climbed up to the top of like a fifth story building. He and his friend were going to race down to the bottom from the outside. Like his friend was going to use the fire escape ladders, and he was going to try to climb down the steel drain, like because there was a steel gutter, like the water gutter off the side of the building. Drunk as hell, and he got about 5-6 feet down that drain before he slipped and fell. So he fell like four stories and landed on his feet. Turns out he had broken his back, broken his ankle, but being absolutely drunk as hell, he walked it off that night, but then went to the hospital the next morning. But while his back was fine, I mean, he, praised God for healing his back. His ankle had never worked quite right since then. Like it always hurt. And he attributed that to like being like the permanent reminder that God left him with to not be that stupid anymore and to quit drinking. Which, fair enough. So one day, like, he was my roommate. Like, I was the one that got the roommate with Grandpa. So one day, we got up in the morning, we were getting ready for things, and he was sitting there just, like, gritting his teeth and, like, holding his ankle. And I'm like, real bad today, huh? He's like, yeah, sucks a lot right now. And just kind of, being in the mindset of, like, half of our classes are basically advanced Bible studies. Like, when you got a major in that college, you also automatically got a minor in Christian theology, because for every 2 non-religious classes you signed up for, you had to sign up for one like Christian themed religious class. And so just being surrounded in that environment, I had a thought to myself like, well, why don't you let me pray over it and see if I can't, make it feel better. And he's like, yeah, man, go for it. have at it. And so I, put my hands like one on his foot, one on his shin, and I prayed, and I felt this. I really, really, really got into it. And I felt this energy like well up inside of me from my chest and like slowly kind of move its way through my arms and like down into my hands and into his foot. It was just this warmth, this like, I don't want to call it gooey because that's just not the right term, but it just it was like a viscous warmth moving through me. And I felt it like move from my hands and into his foot and like his ankle. And when I was done and I like leaned back and I just kind of like waved at it like, there you go, give it a shot. And he got off the bed, stood on it, looked at it kind of funny. He lifted up his other leg and jumped multiple times just on his bad ankle and said, damn, that feels great. Like it doesn't hurt at all anymore. Thanks, man. And he just put on his boots and went to work.
Was this like a long-term thing?
I did it one other time.
Okay, so so what I'm asking is how long did he have like relief from this ankle after you did that?
A month.
A month. Yeah, so that's pretty long term. That's definitely well past like the placebo effect.
Yeah, like it was a month before I noticed him like rubbing at his ankle again. And I'm like, oh, you got it back, huh? And he's like, yeah, there's no way God would let that be permanent because he left this to me for as a reminder. But, I appreciate what you did. And if you ever, if it ever gets bad again, I'll ask you to do it again. So like in my mind, even back then, like I was still kind of, the kind of person to buck the system and the kind of person to like look at things and say, this is bullshit. And so I looked at like these people that are like faith healers on TV with their massive, 5,000, 10,000 person mega churches. They have someone come up to the stage and they like judo chop them with their palm on their forehead and, oh, they don't have AIDS anymore. Like,
yeah.
You're full of shit. Like you are completely full of shit. You're just doing that for money. You're a blasphemer, a fake Christian, and you're going to be burning in the hotter part of hell than the rest of us. You're fake. This is real.
So even at the time, as somebody who gave up a free ride scholarship because you were so deeply Christian that you felt like you needed to go to a Christian school, even at the time you were looking at like mega church faith healers being like, yeah, okay, dude.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Like they're like Joel Osteen, absolutely despise Joel Osteen. Like right. I despise that person. Like and like this, I got kicked out of that college because I started bucking way too hard at different things. And because I dared to have sex with my girlfriend before we got married. But like the thing that really sealed the deal for me was like they had like guest pastors that would come in, and they had like. And when we went to church every single freaking day, like every day at 4:00, there were no classes because everyone was supposed to go to church and like listen to sermons. Like cult, if this was not an officially recognized, accredited college, you would think this is a cult. And so they had guest people come in all the time because one person can't write lessons for 300 people 400 people every single day forever. So they had guest people come in all the time. One day they had a guy come in that basically his lesson was about preaching a Santa Claus God that loves you. He loves all of his children and he has presents and gifts waiting for all of you, and he doesn't want anything but the best for you, and he loves you so much. And the very next day there was another guest speaker that came in. And his take on who or what God was God hates sinners and God hates sin, and he's just looking for an excuse to send you to hell. And if you don't live a perfect life and constantly pray for God to forgive you for the piece of shit, disgusting animal that you are, he would love to send you to hell. And
I think the colloquial term for that kind of guy is a fire and brimstone preacher.
Yeah, a fire and brimstone preacher.
Right.
And I'm like, the whiplash from just hearing these two things back to back, I'm just like, wait a minute, hold the phone here. This book has been unchanged for 1,500 years. Like, yeah, we have different versions that come out, like NIV or whatever else. But whenever people go to write a new version of the Bible, they always go back to the original, like Latin or like Yiddish translations, and then they retranslate it from the original. It's not a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. It always comes from the original when they write a new one. So this book has been unchanged for 1,500 years, and you're telling me that you two people have read this book, and these are the impressions that you got from it? How absurdly wild is that? And so, like, I started kicking up a stink and skipping church, like the daily churches. And the people that were at the head of the church really didn't like that. Um, because I would like clock in, I would scan my student ID, go to the basement, do my homework, not actually attend church. And they didn't like that. And so, like, I had hearings with them, and I'm like, you have two different versions of God that are being described here, and you have these people that are using God as a mask to just they put on the God mask, and they say things as though it were the word of God just to get people to do what the person wanted. And they didn't like that. So they ended up kicking me out.
So now that you sort of have fallen out of, you're fully agnostic now.
Yeah, pretty much.
So now that you have pretty much totally fallen out of the Christian church, what do you think the ankle healing thing was? Like, what is your what do you have any sort of working theory on that?
I do, but do you want to hear the other story first before I get into the quasi-logical explanation?
Yeah.
So the girlfriend that I had that I made while I was in college, who that aforementioned ruined my life. The whole other story. She had family up in Michigan. And so, like, every other weekend, she'd give me doe eyes and say I miss my mommy and make me drive her ass up through Ann Arbor and into Michigan. And like a 6 or 7 hour drive, one way. And so up there, she also had like a lot of other people that kind of lived like in a generalized compound, not, financially affluent. Like her brothers had a small construction business, and they always had like construction equipment and half repair all over the property, that kind of thing. And the person that she basically called her brother, wasn't really her brother, but they've been best friends since they were kids, lived very, very close by. And so one weekend we're up there, and we can't go see him at all. We don't get to see him at all because he is deathly sick. Like, this was way before COVID happened, but the level of sick that people that are dying of COVID were at, like, absolutely bedridden, could barely get up to go take a piss, couldn't eat, couldn't drink, couldn't do anything. Like, he was laying in bed and just dying. They didn't have money to go to the hospital or a doctor, so like they didn't know what was wrong with him. And so we were there for the weekend, and I'm just thinking about it through the weekend, and in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, I did that thing with, Grandpa's ankle. I wonder if I could help him. And so, like, right before we left, I'm like, hey, let's go see your brother real quick. There might be something that I can do. And so we get there, and everyone in the area being very religious and very open to religious things. We get there, and I'm like, hey, I want to go see the brother. I want to pray over him. And they're like, absolutely, go for it. Like, I'll accept prayer from anyone, because prayer is power. So I go in, I say hey, and I ask him, if I can pray over him. He says, absolutely, brother. So like, I put one hand on his forehead and one hand on his chest, and I do the same thing. And I feel that viscous kind of warm energy emanate from my core, like move through my arms into the palms of my hands, and I push it into him. And the whole process takes a few minutes. And whenever I'm done, like, he holds his hand out, and I grab onto it, and he says, thank you. And I say, yeah, no problem. So me and my girlfriend leave, and we, get back down to the college campus. The next day, she she calls me, kind of like the middle of the day, and she says, that her brother's mother just got off the phone with her, like moving around, all kinds of energy, not no coughing, no sneezing, no wheezing, no nothing. Just like had the gumption to mow like to push mow like 2 acres of property, and felt completely fine, like not sick at all anymore. It was just a night and day immediate difference.
And how long did this improvement last?
Forever. Like he wasn't sick anymore.
Oh, so he just got over whatever type of illness he had.
Whatever type of illness he had, it was gone.
And how long was he sick prior to that? Was it because
a week?
Okay, so he was like, so we're talking like he probably had at the bare minimum like an extremely severe flu for like a week.
Flu, pneumonia, like
right.
he could not breathe. He had no energy, like couldn't eat, couldn't drink, like all he did was sleep.
Okay, so I've got 2 questions.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is, what do you think those 2 experiences were? Like, what is your logic behind it now that you're out of the church? Because at the time you probably just thought like, oh, this is like how it works, no big deal.
Yeah, like if there's a verse in the Bible that says that if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. And that's the scripture that a lot of people like really like to move on to say, you can do anything, through Christ who strengthens me, whatever. And that's the scripture that you lean on if you believe that you have these kinds of powers. Like if you believe that God is real and you believe that you have this power just as much as you believe that the sky is blue, the grass is green, and that rocks are hard, like if you have that level of just, faith, you can do anything. And it's just getting to that level of faith that is the hard part. And I just kind of assumed that I had gotten there, Buddhist people hitting their full enlightenment sort of thing. As far as where I'm at right now, like full logic, full science, full only phenomena that we have right now, I don't have one. So I mean, I have a different theory that still extends into the world of the spiritual, but just raw science, I don't have one.
Okay, let's hear your updated spiritual theory first before I get into the second question.
Kind of going back to an earlier comment, I do believe that there is another kind of energy that exists that we simply don't have the machines to measure. And that energy is what describes the otherwise undescribable spiritual phenomena. I believe that this energy exists in almost a weave. So, like, the world itself is almost a canvas. And as you exist in one space for longer and longer and longer, you leave a deeper imprint upon that canvas. And stronger emotions that you feel also intensify the imprint that you leave upon the canvas. And I do believe that it is possible to actively reach in and grab a hold of some of that energy and to manifest it into something. But you can't just do it necessarily on command unless you have some means of strong faith to use as a background or as a hook to reach in and grab it and pull it out. So you have to have faith in something. It doesn't really matter what that something is, but if you believe in something strong enough, then you can grab little bits of it and use it to do things.
Then my second question would be, and I've been telling my friends about the emails that I've been getting and stuff, and I said to the boys in the group chat how I was talking to this guy and he's telling me ghost stories, and then he dropped this faith healing thing and it was nuts. And then one of my friends said, I cannot imagine being able to faith heal people and then lose my religion. So my question is, if you did these 2 things that I think any practicing Christian would consider a miracle.
Yeah.
How was that not powerful enough for you to be in the church? Was there just like so many contradictions in the church that it was like untenable?
Yeah, it's today I find I find the idea of The Christian organized religion as it stands is not tenable to my personal beliefs. Like I cannot, like, not to get too terribly political on your podcast, but the last 6 years had just driven such a terrible wedge between like me and my faith and the rest of the people that supposedly share my faith. Like, I do not believe that the people that shared my faith act anywhere near the way that they should. I don't believe that they espouse any of the values that Jesus Christ taught. I don't. I just, and I see so much hate and vitriol and just so much malice coming from organized religion. I do not want to associate myself with that. I do not want to tell people I am a Christian, because that brings so many connotations into their mind about the kind of person that I am, and I don't want it. I do not want that. Yeah.
So then my follow-up would be, do you have, so you're not Christian anymore, obviously, but you've got this like sort of spiritual background. Like it didn't completely shake your belief in the fact that there could be in the possibility of like something metaphysical. So do you have like any current sort of practice you do? Do you like do any meditations or anything, or is that like just not even a part of your life anymore?
It's not really a part of my life anymore. I have my set of beliefs, but it's not been filtered through the Christianity anymore. So I've transitioned from like, having those experiences of being a faith healer. And I have other experiences too. Like I have one friend who is he was the best man at my wedding. He's a Levian Satanist. And he, basically through his worship, he had a altar set up, in his home. And after he set that up and worshipped at it a few times, he started seeing like these shadowy figures out of the corner of his eye all the time. And these different, like, I want to reuse the word figure, but that's not quite correct. Like these entities that would just kind of stalk him, like wherever he went, and just follow him. But he told me that the only place that he had never ever seen those figures was when he was at my house, because I blessed our house, like me and my wife. Like I went around, I blessed it, I sanctified it, I cleaned it. Nothing bad was allowed anywhere near my house. And he confirmed that by telling me that like that's like the one place he never saw them. They weren't allowed there. It was almost like at a certain point, I felt almost like a very, very mundane, very, very boring, run of the mill, like real life Constantine in a sense. But I was really, really entrenched into that world, and that was where all of my belief was. So at this point in time, I've kind of transitioned from saying that all of this is sourced from God to all of this is sourced from this kind of energy that we manifest, and the imprint that we leave in the spaces that we live in and with the emotions that we feel has flavors and colors. So like if you're just a really nasty person, you're full of hate, you're full of anger, you're full of ill intent, then the thing that you leave behind whenever you die is going to be malicious. It's going to be awful. But if you're a good person and you're caring and you try to like heal people and like take care of people, then the thing that you leave behind is going to be very benevolent and is going to fill you with kind of like this peace and calm. And then you, like I said, you can pluck out little bits of that energy that you create if you're tuned in correctly and can manifest that onto the world. So that's how I kind of made the transition from filtering everything through the lens of Christianity into looking at things in a more agnostic term, while still like believing that these weird things that I have experienced and that I have done actually happened.
You're definitely the only person that I've ever talked to, and if I had to guess, probably the only person that any of the listeners have heard that has something along the lines of, I had relatively strong faith. I was able to pull off a couple of faith healings, and now I'm just kind of over it. Is that like is that like a fair characterization, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, eh, my morals, values, and convictions would never allow me to commodify
Right.
what I was capable of doing.
Like, even if you could right now get back into a meditative practice and like do all this stuff and attain that ability, you wouldn't even really know. You wouldn't even know like what to ethically do with it.
No, I mean, like, I know what I would ethically do with it. Like, I would go around and quietly help people that needed it quietly.
Right.
Like,
Which is, I mean, that would be pretty difficult to maintain. Like, it's pretty. Once you do that a few times, word starts to get out a little bit. You know what I mean?
yeah, and that's the danger. Like, I would never want to pull that attention onto myself. I don't want it. I don't need it. Like, that's not a thing that you want to be loud.
Okay. So this interview has like two halves. And so let's talk about kind of like the ghost stories at the beginning first. And this is why I've had people send me like little tiny isolated ghost stories, and I usually tell them like just send me a voice memo and I'll save it. And I've got a couple of them compiled that I might release someday as like a compilation episode or something. But the reason that I don't really interview people is because a lot of time with these kinds of like ghost stories, they're just kind of like cool and interesting, but there's not really like that much you can say about them. Like, so with this first one, he had that meditative experience, and it's like, I've done enough like meditation to know like what kind of stuff he's talking about how you like lose track of time and how it like definitely is like an altered state. Like, one time I was in an airport, I was like insanely tired, and I laid down, and like for whatever reason I was just amped up because I like drank a bunch of caffeine. We were in an airport and I was like really tired, but I couldn't go to sleep. But I just sort of like slipped into this weird like in between state of like being asleep and being awake that like felt really meditative, and I did that for like an hour, and then I like got up after that and was like fine. It was weird. It was like I was awake and asleep at the same time. I know that weird stuff happens. I mean, that doesn't really explain his friends like not being able to see him in the graveyard or anything like that. It just kind of like ends there, like in a lot, and I think that's why I think most people aren't lying about their like isolated ghost stories, because they're usually not interesting enough to like make up as a lie. Like, you wouldn't, if you're trying to make up a cool, crazy ghost, like spooky ghost story, it wouldn't be like, oh, one time I sat down on a grave and my friends couldn't find me for like 10 minutes and then we just like went home. Like, that isn't like good storytelling, so why would you lie about it? Kind of similar, I have similar thoughts on the second ghost story where they're at the asylum ruins, where it's definitely interesting. Like, I've heard 1,000 stories about like stuff being thrown around at sites like this, or somebody getting scratched, or people hearing voices. Like, we've heard all of these stories 100 times. It's just, they're not like, we've almost gotten to the point in like the paranormal community where this stuff is like mundane. It's not even really interesting to hear anymore because we've heard it so many times. So my question is like, why? You know who's lying, because the people who are lying have to make increasingly dramatic claims. Like, if you look at famed liar and my personal hero Zach Baggins, his stories have to get more deranged over time. Like, they have to keep elevating to the point where he's getting like demonically possessed every like 4 episodes of the show. So I tend to think that people who are like, yeah, we like did an investigation in an area and like there was rocks being thrown around, are probably telling the truth as it appeared to be happening to them on the ground.
I had never heard of the balancing before, like that like phenomenon or whatever. I'd never heard of that, and I guess I didn't really know what he meant by a white witch.
Oh, a white witch is somebody who does like, it's like somebody who's using a witchcraft practice to do like positive things.
Oh, okay. So like Wicca or whatever.
Yeah, like any, I mean,
just not going psycho.
Yeah, it would be like whatever. I'm sure it was somebody who practiced a lot of like very specific Appalachian culture stuff.
Okay.
Because Appalachian folklore is like its own isolated thing. I don't even really know.
It's just a not evil witch.
Yeah, pretty much.
But the balancing was interesting to me. I'd never heard of that.
I've heard of that. I've heard of that before. I know there's like tourist traps where like they do some shit where they set the building up so that it's like an illusion, so like things can't balance properly. I've heard of people being on investigations in where stuff happens where like they drop a pencil and it like perfectly lands on the eraser and just sits there, and it's like that could be a coincidence, but man, that's really like I've heard of stuff like that before.
Ghosts just really like bottle flipping.
Yeah, they're really into bottle flipping. The second half of this interview, though, is when things obviously take a turn and get a little bit more interesting and a little bit more, I guess, controversial. I really don't know, because I don't think that Jacob is like lying about this stuff, because it doesn't, again, it's not an interesting lie. Like you would think if somebody was going to lie, they would be like, hey, I'm like currently a faith healer right now. I'm actually doing it. Here's all the heroic stories of me saving kids with leukemia. Like, that's the kind of stuff that you hear from people that are lying. You usually don't hear, oh yeah, I did that like once or twice and now it's whatever. That's like not, that doesn't have like the architecture of somebody who's like lying about it. The other thing about these that are interesting that doesn't really fit the typical like archetype of somebody making up a faith healing story is that like neither of these things were like permanent. So with the ankle thing, it lasted for like a month and then it went back to normal. And then with the guy who was sick, he like got over it the next day, but that's just how being sick works. Like you get over things with time. So this wasn't a scenario where somebody was like terminal and then he like healed them, or somebody had like bad arthritis and then he like permanently healed the arthritis. It was like these very small temporary fixes that weren't really very dramatic or like life-changing for either of the people, which is interesting. It
immediately reminded me of Reiki, because I have a lot of experience with like the new age Reiki masters and that sort of thing. And the viscous kind of energy feeling is exactly what they always describe. It's always temporary. It's always kind of like it takes a few moments and it's like a trance sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's not always the trance thing. Sometimes people will like blink and say, "Oh yeah, you're fine now." Obviously there's levels to it, but it sounded almost identical to every Reiki master I've ever heard.
And this one is like I don't know, like,
and he didn't have to pay for a class to do it. So
yeah, and so like you've got a guy that you knew who had like that crazy spinal injury or whatever and was like kind of a good, we don't know the details of the injury, but we know that he was like injured somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And you said that he was like one of these like light worker Reiki type guys that you like genuinely think is not bullshitting.
Yeah.
His stuff seems like really similar to what this guy is talking about too.
Yeah, exactly. He didn't go through any training. He didn't pay for any programs. It was just he deals with his own issues and through that kind of learned his own practice and is just a really genuine person, and it describes something really similar where it's like he doesn't have to think about it. It's not like a big deal.
I have a really hard time like placing this kind of stuff because I think that there is like very obviously a sort of an objective reality outside of ourselves. Like I don't think there's a lot of people in like that take sort of the idealism route in the wrong direction, believe in like sort of like the secret, you can manifest reality type stuff, you just need to believe, and that like theoretically if you believed hard enough you could like walk through a solid wall because like the wall's not real.
I've heard that. Yeah.
And, yeah, like that, like that's, people take like that, they hear stuff like that of like, you know, with the faith of a mustard seed you can move a mountain. They hear that kind of stuff and they're like, oh well, so reality is fake and you can just like see the Matrix and like stop bullets like Neo. But it's really clear to me that that isn't the case, which is why I like the version of idealism where we are like disassociated from the original reality such that there is like an objective reality being held in a mind that's like sort of separate from ours, even though we're kind of technically the same thing. Because I just don't really see a way where I don't really see a reality where it's like that porous. And if that was the case, so you could make the argument like, oh, if you believed hard enough, you could walk through a wall, but it's just like beyond the human capability to believe that hard. Like you can't, it's like physically impossible for you to be looking at a wall and be able to walk through it. But then you could make the argument, well, we have like insane people and we have like children. So you would think that an insane person or a child at least once would like be able to pull off one of these crazy miracles if that was the case. Like, surely we could find a schizophrenic person who, like, believes that he can fly to the degree that he can at least, like, levitate off the ground. Like, this would be, like, documented if it was a thing that, like, if reality was, like, that porous. But one of the things that I like about this is that both of these cases are, like, kind of mild and kind of temporary. And they involve... There's a human element involved in it. Because, like, pain in your ankle is a phenomenon of, like, human consciousness. That's a thing that, like, you have to experience. Being sick to a certain level, like, feeling sick is also a phenomenon of human consciousness. And we know that the placebo is like an insanely strong effect. So I can imagine a theoretic reality where reality is, like, wiggly, especially in regards to, like, human consciousness. And that it might be the case that if you believe very hard, you can kind of like juice a very, 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 very small effect specifically with things that have to deal with conscious experience, and you can get like very temporary results out of it. And I think that's what a lot of like quote unquote magic is trying to get like is trying to make changes specifically in things that deal with conscious experience.
It's difficult to even not blame it on placebo, but like correlate it to placebo, because even though I think a lot of like Reiki stuff can be bullshitting or like really played up, people are charging hundreds of dollars to do this shit. It's insane.
Yeah.
But people are having actual real effects from it. So like, is it even placebo at that point?
Yeah, well, and that's the thing about placebo effect is another one of those things that we just kind of like gave a name and we're like, oh, well, we named it, so it's like we know what it is and it's real now, so everything is placebo. But we don't actually understand the placebo effect very well, or like how it works, or why it seems to work better for like, because placebo can have like insanely strong effects for like one group of people and then not as strong of effects for like a different group. I bet you there's, I'm just like making this up, I don't know, but I bet you there's like a correlation between people who have strong effects in placebo and people who are like a little bit more suggestible. Like I bet if you took a group of people that are susceptible to hypnosis, they would also be susceptible to placebo. I'm sure that there's like something to that. But like you said, it's like, okay, if somebody has like a chronic condition like arthritis, there's no cure for. There's nothing you can do. All you can do is like manage it. And they get, every time they go to their Reiki healer, they're like fine for a week. It's like, okay, is like, what do we mean? Like, is that a placebo, or is that guy just doing it? Like, is he just like providing like because that's what I would believe. If humans had the capability to psychically administer the approximate pain-killing equivalent of taking like 5 aspirin, that would be believable. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I can look at it from a more personal perspective, because I've had people do Reiki on me. In like the environment I was in, everybody's trying to hand out Reiki to everybody else because it's like a sideshow thing. And I've had people do it for me. And I've had probably once or twice where I was like, okay, I kind of feel like I feel something, but also I kind of am sort of a skeptic even then. So I was like, okay, I could just be falling for the placebo right now. So I didn't put too much weight into it. But like, I get headaches, right? And I've had people do Reiki on headaches before, and it didn't go away completely. But I was like, okay, I feel like functional now. I don't know if that like I don't know if it actually happened or I'm just tricking myself.
Yeah, and that's why I think that this stuff works. The reason that you hear so much about this kind of stuff helping with like chronic pain specifically is because whether it's headaches or like a fucked up ankle or like whatever, pick any one. I think the reason you hear about it working for that specifically is that chronic pain is like I said, it is the most, this is only a like phenomena of consciousness. Like you can't, like there is like a physical thing like inflammation or whatever that is like making you feel pain, but the sensation of feeling pain is a thing that your brain like makes up. And I think that's why these kinds of techniques specifically work very good for that. And like with in the story that we listened to where the guy has the flu, like it could be the case that he hit him with like this healing and that made him feel less sick for a couple days. Or I guess in this case it was like it made him feel less sick for like that night, and him just feeling less sick and kind of like getting his body to like be less inflamed helped his immune system like get over. It helped his immune system do what it was already going to do, but like a little bit quicker. So he was good the next day, whereas like he would have been good, I don't know, like 2 days from that point or something. Because if you've ever been, I feel like probably everybody who's been really sick has the experience of like after like the fever breaks, you kind of get over it pretty quick. Even when you're like the sickest I've ever been, where I was like bedridden and throwing up. I was like trying to drink like a water bottle cap of water, and even that was like making me throw up. Like my ab muscles were like cramping and sore from how much I was puking and how hard I was puking. And like once that like broke, I just kind of got over it and was fine.
Oh yeah, even with like the headache Reiki stuff I've had, I'm like, okay, somebody had a hand on my forehead and they were like doing this meditation thing. Like, did I just relax enough that it kind of started to break, and that's what the effects was? Like, there's a billion reasons to like explain all of it, but you can't know unless you've had it done to you.
And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about on this one, since we're talking about like miracles, right? I said that most practicing Christians would probably consider that these like minor miracles. If you listen to a lot of Terence McKenna, he had two really interesting stories and a really interesting take on like how miracles work. So the first story is, I'm not going to get into the deep Terence McKenna lore, but one of the things about him is that he was an ethnobotanist, and he was also like a professional butterfly catcher for a while. This was like in the fucking 60s. This was like in the 60s and 70s where you could make money. Like now it's difficult to make money being like a weird outsider freak. But in the 60s and 70s, everything was cheaper and the dollar was worth a little bit more. So you could just be a weird freak who's like on the margin of society and make it. That's why like the hippie movement kind of was working in the 60s and 70s. So he was a professional butterfly catcher for a long time, where he would like catch butterflies and like sell them off, or like, I don't know the mechanics of it. So he was really invested in this. So when he did his famous rainforest trips, he like brought all of his butterfly stuff and was like catching like, you know, all these wild tropical butterflies and stuff. And during this infamous Amazon rainforest trip, which you can read about in his book True Hallucinations, they were ripped on mushrooms like the whole time. They were doing a completely inadvisable amount of mushrooms. Like were completely in and out of like losing touch with reality. And at one point he goes out into the woods and he just like sets the butterfly catching stuff down and like puts his arms out, and like the butterflies just like fly out of the bushes and like land on him. And then he goes back to the camp and is like, guys, you're not going to believe this. I'm like Butterfly Christ. Like, follow me out to the woods. Watch this cool thing I can do. And they're like, they follow him out there, and then he tries to do it again, and the butterflies don't show up. And obviously they're like, dude, you're fucking high. Like,
yeah,
like sit down. And the other time he did it, he was talking about it. They were cooking on a pan while they were camping, and this was like before like nonstick and stuff. So when you cooked on a pan over a campfire, it would like get totally fucked. Like whatever you were cooking would like burn onto the bottom of the iron skillet or whatever, and it would just be a nightmare. Or he specifically says that it's pot. So somebody would have to like volunteer to go down to the river and scrub all the burnt shit out of the pot. because that like ruins the flavor of the next thing that you cook to have all the burnt stuff in the pot. And he said that like, and it was like a huge pain in the ass. You had to like really scrub to get all this burnt shit out of the bottom. And he said one time he like goes down to do it, and he just like very sincerely asked, like, okay, universe, I really don't want to scrub this pot. Like, please, like cut me a little bit of slack. And he said doing this, the stuff that was burnt in the bottom of the pot just like sort of rinsed out with the river water. Like he didn't have to scrub it at all. It just came out. And then again, like the next time he has a chance to do this, he's like, guys, watch this. I've like cracked the code. I see the Matrix. Watch. And he brings everybody down, and he tries to like, he like asks the pan to clean itself, and then it doesn't work. And then he looks like a maniac again, and everybody makes fun of him. And the insight that he took away from these two things was that it seems like there's like a humility attached to this, and that you can only perform this stuff if you're like genuine in doing it for like the good of like yourself. But the minute that you try to like use your ego to weaponize it and say like, hey, look at this cool thing that I did, you're fucked. Like it stops working immediately. That's interesting because Terrence McKenna is like, and I've listened to a lot of him. I'm sure he talks about this a little bit. He's like kind of a guy with a big ego. Like he charged a lot for his speaking tours. He was like a guy who liked to be in front of people talking. Like he was very performative. Like he's a little bit of an ego guy. I think that is always what those two stories and that explanation of like, you genuinely have to have like a humility to this that is impossible for the average person to be able to pull it off. And then if you look at the documentary Love and Saucers with David Huggins, who I'm sure I've talked about it in one of these episodes so far. David Huggins is like this insanely humble guy who's like very old, just works part-time at a sandwich shop, works on his cool alien paintings, and is allegedly in contact with these like aliens. And he's like so humble and just so go with the flow that if you watch the documentary, he says that it never even occurred to him to ask the aliens where they're from, because it didn't like even occur to him to like impose. I feel like there's something to that. Like, like to be able to pull off stuff like this, you have to be like completely devoid of any kind of like ego or narcissism, and completely, because like if it was me, I'm not like evil, but I really like not having a boss. So if there was like some magic trick I could do, I probably would charge money for it. Like I would probably be like, okay, how can I use this to be able to like buy groceries instead of having to go to work to buy groceries? And I feel like that thought naturally precludes somebody like me from being able to do this stuff. Even if I was like a really good astral projector, it was like, okay, we're doing the astral projection podcast to make money, obviously. That would be like my second thought. So, and I really think there's something to that. And now that Jacob has dropped out of the faith and like kind of has a hard time believing in this stuff, I think you're sort of like, I feel like thinking that things are bullshit is one of the positive aspects of the human ego, of being like, okay, like we're smart enough to understand that that's bullshit. Which, because people talk about ego as if it's universally bad, but that's not true. Your ego has to exist in like balance with other stuff. If you have no ego, then you're just like somebody that can be like walked over and has like no ambition. And the like enlightened monks would say that's actually good, and that's how you like attain nirvana, is by completely deleting the ego and realizing that like the individual is fake. But that's like one extreme in the other direction. And I think that him sort of like realizing like, wait a minute, I can use critical thinking and like see through some of these scams. I think that just that base level of like an ego in there kind of makes doing some of these like workings very difficult or borderline impossible. Because even you said that like that this guy that we've been gesturing towards, you say that like he is the most like freakishly humble and like timid guys.
Yeah. I mean, like he charges, but it's not absurd. He doesn't like make a show of it all.
Yeah.
He's just like a genuine, like, nice guy. Just wants to help people, and he's like, but I gotta pay rent, so, you know, we gotta, like, have a little bit of ebb and flow here.
Well, and I know this guy, and he will also do, like, trades and stuff. Like,
he does it for free all the time. He does trades and shit. Like, it's not...
like, he's very... He'll go to, like, you know, these metaphysical fairs and stuff and, like, set up a booth and charge a little bit of money for it. But, like, if me and you were to call him right now, he would do it for free.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, no questions asked.
Yeah, I just don't know. And again, I'm going to be putting a disclaimer in the intro to this too, but it does bear repeating. If you are, like, sick or have something going on, go to an actual doctor for the love of God.
Yeah.
Like, listen, you can go to the fucking Reiki healers. You can go to you can drink your herbal tea. You can go to, like, a priest and have them bless you. You can do all of that stuff. Also go to an actual doctor, because doctors spend a lot of time being able to cure physical acute problems, and those objectively exist. If you don't believe that physical acute problems exist, break your arm with a hammer and then tell me that they don't. Like, they definitely do, for real. If you have any issue with your body or brain, go to a doctor, go to a psychologist. All this stuff is real. And then you can do the spiritual shit as a practice on your own time or on the side.
You can stop at the metaphysical fair on the way home from the doctor.
Yeah, that's fine. Today's conclusion section is going to be pretty short, because I think that interview really speaks for itself, and I don't think we left any holes in the discussion portion. If you want to find us on Twitter, we are at DeepWeirdPod. We also have an active Discord community that you can join. You can find the link to that in the description of any of my old, probably Jacob, YouTube videos. We'll probably post it on Twitter. We'll probably post it on Patreon. It'll be easy to find if you're the kind of person that uses Discord. If you have a story that you would like to share with us, please send us an email at deep.weird@gmail.com. And if you've been enjoying the show, please give us a 5-star review. Those go a long way to keeping the show alive. Deep Weird is written and produced by me, Jacob Pittman, and the music that you've heard tonight was produced by Griffin Dodefray. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.